Elias Corbin navigated his car through the bustling grocery store parking lot, his eyes scanning the packed rows for a sliver of an opening. The Saturday sun beat down, illuminating a scene of controlled chaos as shoppers darted in and out, their carts full for the weekend. As he rounded a lane, he saw it, an ideal spot, tantalizingly close to the entrance, a true prize on a day like this. He smoothly guided his vehicle into the space, taking care to align it perfectly within the white lines. The moment his door clicked open, the piercing shriek of tires tore through the air. His head snapped up to see a pristine white SUV swerving aggressively beside him. A woman inside whose face was already a mask of fury before her window was even fully down. "Hey!" she barked, her finger jabbing accusingly in his direction. "That was my space." Elias blinked, taken aback by the sheer velocity of her anger. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice a calm counterpoint to her brewing storm. The woman, now erupting from her car, slammed her door with a resonant bang. She stalked towards him, her voice a weapon she had no intention of holstering. "I was waiting for that space," she seethed, invading his personal bubble. "I had my signal on and everything." Elias cast a quick glance around. He hadn't seen a single waiting car. The lane had been clear. Maintaining his even tone, he stated simply, "I didn't see you. The spot was open when I arrived." Her eyes narrowed to slits, and she folded her arms across her chest, glaring as if he had uttered a profound personal insult. "Of course you didn't see me," she sneered. "You people never do you?" Elias felt his jaw tighten, a familiar, weary recognition dawning on him. He knew this path, the swift descent from a minor parking dispute into a venomous racial confrontation. He took a centering breath, resolving not to let her poison seep under his skin. "Look, I'm sorry if you were waiting, but the space was unoccupied. I didn't cut you off." "Don't you dare talk to me like that," she snapped back, her volume climbing with every syllable. "I've had it with you people thinking you can just do whatever you want. You're all the same. Entitled, disrespectful, and convinced the rules don't apply to you." Elias clenched his fists inside his pockets, a silent battle to maintain his composure. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to buy some groceries. I don't want any trouble. It's only a parking spot." His measured tone seemed to enrage her further, her face contorting with a fresh wave of fury. She lunged a step closer, her finger now aimed directly at his chest. "Trouble? You want to talk about trouble? People like you are nothing but trouble. You swarm into nice neighborhoods like this and ruin everything. I bet you don't even live around here, do you?" A flicker of his own anger ignited, but he kept his voice steady. "Where I live has absolutely nothing to do with this." "Of course it does," she shrieked, now visibly trembling with rage. "This is exactly what happens when they let people like you move into our communities. You think you can just take whatever you want. I've had it with your kind." Her words were like acid, but Elias refused to grant her the satisfaction of a visible reaction. He noticed a few onlookers now, their gazes subtly fixed on the escalating drama. He had to end this before it spiraled further. "I'm not doing this with you," he said firmly, turning to walk towards the store. "You're upset about a parking spot, but this isn't worth it." Before he could manage more than a couple of steps, she lunged, shoving him hard from behind. Elias stumbled forward, catching his balance just before he hit the asphalt. His heart hammered against his ribs as he spun around to face her. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he snapped, his patience finally worn to a thread. "You don't get to put your hands on me." Serafina, as he had mentally christened her, stood her ground, her chest heaving. "Oh, I'll do whatever I want." "You think you can just walk away from me?" "I'm not finished with you yet." Elias took a strategic step back, his mind racing through 1,000 potential outcomes, none of them good. He'd witnessed too many scenarios like this, where a black man defending himself was somehow twisted into the aggressor in the eyes of the world. "Lady, walk away before you do something you'll regret," he warned, his voice low. She sneered, her lip curling in disgust. "You don't tell me what to do, boy." The word hung in the air, thick and heavy with its ugly racist history. Elias's breath caught in his throat, his fists clenching so tight his nails dug into his palms. This was never about a parking spot. It was about dominance, about entitlement, about her unshakable belief that she could say and do anything without consequence. The urge to just leave was powerful, but the weight of her words, the shove, it all churned just beneath the surface. And then, without another word of warning, she attacked. Her hand sliced through the air, fast and sharp, connecting with his face in a slap so loud it echoed off the nearby cars. The impact snapped his head to the side, a sharp sting radiating across his cheek and jaw. His skin burned, not just from the blow, but from the raw humiliation of the public spectacle she was creating. Elias stood there for a heartbeat, stunned, his mind trying to process the sheer audacity of what had just happened. The slap was more than physical. It was a declaration, a statement of her perceived superiority, her belief that she could strike him, degrade him, and face no repercussions. His muscles tensed, every fiber of his being screaming for a reaction. He knew what he was supposed to do, the high road he was expected to take, but the fire she had ignited refused to be extinguished. He couldn't just absorb this. Without conscious thought, he raised his own hand and slapped her back. It wasn't with the same vicious force, but it was firm enough to deliver a clear, unambiguous message. The contact was controlled, a restrained response rather than a retaliatory strike. Serafina staggered back, her hand flying to her own cheek, her eyes wide with utter disbelief. For a split second, a stunned silence descended. Then she erupted. You hit me!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and unhinged. "You animal! You're going to pay for this. Do you have any idea who I am? You think you can put your hands on me? I will ruin you." Her words tumbled out in a frantic, breathless torrent, each one louder than the last. She flailed her arms wildly like a toddler in the throes of a tantrum, her face turning a blotchy, ugly shade of crimson. She scanned the crowd of onlookers, searching for allies, for validation. "He assaulted me!" she screamed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Elias. "He hit me! This thug thinks he can hit a woman! You're done!" Elias's pulse hammered as more people turned their attention to the scene, some whispering, others raising their phones. He could feel their gazes on him, their judgments forming in real time. He had seen this play out before, seen how quickly the narrative could be twisted, how easily he could be painted as the villain in a story he never wrote. He took a step back, attempting to inject calm into the chaos. "You hit me first. I didn't want any of this." Serafina, still clutching her cheek, hissed at him like a cornered snake. "I'm not doing this with you," Elias stated, his voice now cold and steady. "I'm done." Without waiting for another outburst, he turned and walked away, his pulse still thundering, his cheek still burning. Behind him, her screams continued, devolving into incoherent rage. "You're done, you hear me? You're finished!" Elias didn't look back. He walked into the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind him, but her voice followed, echoing in his ears, loud and furious, as if it would never truly fade. Inside the store, the atmosphere was a jarring shift from the chaos he had just escaped. The gentle hum of refrigerators and the low murmur of shoppers created a sense of normalcy that felt utterly surreal. He gripped the handle of his shopping cart, his knuckles white, trying to will his heart back to a normal rhythm. As he moved through the aisles, his mind replayed every second of the confrontation. Each word, each gesture, a looping film in his head. He could still feel the stinging imprint of her hand on his cheek, and even more profoundly, the weight of her words. "Boy." The word lingered, laced with a particular kind of venom. No matter how many times he encountered this brand of hatred, its sheer ugliness never failed to land a heavy blow. He should have walked away sooner, he told himself, but the pattern was always the same. People like Serafina felt they had a divine right to say and do as they pleased, certain they were protected by their privilege and by his lack of it. It was exhausting, this constant draining dance between turning the other cheek and standing up for his own dignity, knowing the outcome was often predetermined regardless of his choice. He could already imagine the police report if they were called. Elias shook his head, trying to force his thoughts onto the task at hand. He was here for groceries, simple as that. Bread, milk, eggs, just the basics. But as he reached for a loaf of bread, his hand paused. His mind wasn't in the brightly lit aisle. It was back in that parking lot, trapped in the heat of her insults and the shock of her slap. The crowd had been watching, and he knew what they saw: a black man arguing with a white woman. He had felt their eyes, the subtle shift in their expressions when she began her performance, screaming that he had hit her, conveniently omitting the fact that she had struck first. He had barely touched her compared to the force she had used. But that detail wouldn't matter. It never did. He dropped the bread into his cart and moved on, trying to focus. But as he walked, a different kind of anger began to crystallize within him. It wasn't the hot, reactive rage from the argument. It was a deeper, colder, and far more familiar feeling. It was the same anger he felt every time someone looked at him as if he didn't belong. Every time he was judged by the color of his skin instead of the content of his character. It was never just about the parking spot or the slap. It was about the way she had looked at him from the very beginning, as if he were something less than human, an obstacle in her world. Her words had been a slap long before her hand ever touched his face. Elias rounded another corner, grabbed a carton of milk, and placed it in his cart with more force than necessary. He took a deep, shuddering breath. This wasn't his first encounter with this kind of venom, and he knew it wouldn't be his last. But today, for some reason, it felt heavier, like it had burrowed under his skin in a way he couldn't shake. He had tried to do the right thing, to de-escalate, to walk away, but the shove, the slap, she had crossed a line that demanded a response. The memory of hitting her back gnawed at him, not from guilt, but from the cold certainty that it would be used as a weapon against him. He hadn't struck her out of rage. It had been a reaction, a controlled response. Yet she would twist it, scream louder, and masterfully play the victim because she knew that role inside and out. As Elias moved through the store, filling his cart, he couldn't help but wonder how the scene would have played out if their roles were reversed. If he had been the one to initiate the argument, to throw the first slap, would anyone have believed his side of the story? Would the crowd have watched with the same passive curiosity? He reached the checkout line, still lost in thought. The cashier offered a polite, detached smile, utterly oblivious to the storm raging inside him. Elias forced a nod, swiped his card, grabbed his bags, and headed for the exit. The moment he stepped back outside, the knot in his stomach cinched tighter. He dreaded returning to his car, dreaded what he might find. Was she still there? Had she caused more trouble? He couldn't shake the premonition that she wasn't the type to simply leave. As he neared his parking spot, Elias saw his car in the distance, and his heart sank. Even from here he could tell something was terribly wrong. His pace quickened, and as he drew closer, the damage came into sharp, sickening focus. Long, deep scratches defaced the side of his car, as if someone had dragged a key across the paint with vicious intent, gouging out chunks of the glossy finish. He stopped dead, staring at the violation, his fists clenching at his sides as a wave of disbelief and pure fury washed over him. Serafina. It had to be her. This wasn't random vandalism. This was a personal, vindictive act. Elias walked to the side of his car, his fingers tracing the deep grooves in the metal. The scratches were fresh. She had done this while he was inside, likely laughing to herself, convinced she had won. He could almost hear her voice again, dripping with condescension, spitting out her poison, as if she were untouchable. The anger surged again, stronger this time, hotter. His chest tightened as he surveyed the damage. The quiet internal debate he'd been having was over. This had moved beyond words and slaps. She had crossed into something tangible, something that would cost him money and time to repair. He scanned the parking lot, half expecting to see her gloating nearby, but she was gone. For a moment he considered calling the police, but hesitation stopped him. He knew the script. She would twist the story, play the victim, paint him as the aggressor, and now there were no witnesses left to support him. Still, something inside him, a stubborn core of self-respect, refused to let this go. He was so tired of backing down, so tired of letting people like her believe they could act without consequence. Elias leaned against his violated car, staring at the scratches, his mind racing. He wouldn't just let this slide. He couldn't. 15 minutes ticked by as he sat there, waiting, thinking. And then, as if on cue, he heard the sound of laughter. He looked up and saw her. Serafina. Standing a few cars away, leaning against her SUV with a smug, triumphant smile plastered on her face, she had been watching him the entire time. "Oh, poor you," she sneered, her voice oozing with fake sympathy. "Looks like someone messed up your precious little car. Guess you shouldn't have taken my spot, huh?" Elias stared at her, his anger simmering just below a full boil. He stood up straight, his gaze locking with hers. "You think this is funny?" Serafina let out another laugh, louder this time. "Oh, I think it's hilarious. And you can't do anything about it. What are you going to do, call the cops? Good luck with that. They'll just arrest you and take my side. You people never learn." Her words were gasoline on an open flame. Elias felt his blood run hot. He had never been a violent man, but the urge to say something, anything, to shatter that smug expression was overwhelming. He took a step toward her, but before he could speak, she smirked. "Go ahead, say something. I dare you." Elias knew his next words had to be chosen with surgical precision. He knew exactly what to say to cut through her arrogance, to knock her off her self-appointed pedestal. But even as the words formed, he wondered how much deeper this hole would get if he gave her the reaction she so desperately craved. And then she did something he never anticipated. She climbed into her SUV, a wicked grin still on her face as she looked at him through the open window. For a split second, he thought she was finally leaving. But then, without warning, she slammed the vehicle into reverse and drove straight into his car. The sickening crunch of metal on metal echoed through the parking lot. Elias's eyes widened in shock as the rear of her SUV crumpled his front bumper. Serafina looked back at him, laughing, before peeling out of the parking lot, leaving Elias standing there in stunned disbelief. The damage was now undeniable and intentional. This was no longer a slap in the face. This was war. Elias reached for his phone, his hand shaking with adrenaline. It was time to call the police. Elias's hand trembled as he dialed the number, his breath coming in shallow bursts from the shock of what had just transpired. The grating sound of Serafina's SUV smashing into his car still reverberated in his mind. A vice of frustration tightened around his chest. The sheer weight of her words, her actions, the entirety of what she represented, was crushing him. He had tried to maintain his composure, tried to be the bigger person, but she was relentless. The phone rang, and when the operator answered, Elias kept his voice remarkably steady, masking the fury simmering just beneath the surface. "I'd like to report an incident," he said, pausing to keep his voice even. "A woman just intentionally hit my car and drove off. I'm following her now." The operator requested details, and Elias quickly relayed a description of Serafina's SUV, the make, model, and their current location. His hands were still clamped to the steering wheel, the raw energy from the confrontation pulsing through his fingers as he trailed her vehicle from a safe distance. The last thing he wanted was another direct confrontation, but he was not about to let her simply vanish. He kept his eyes locked on her SUV as they moved through quiet suburban streets, his mind racing. What if she was right? What if the police automatically sided with her? He'd seen it happen countless times, but this felt different. There was too much at stake. She had escalated things beyond insults, beyond even physical assault. This was about more than his pride now. This was about justice. A few minutes later, up ahead, Elias saw the brilliant strobing lights of a police car. His heart pounded as he watched Serafina's SUV slow down. The police had intercepted her at a red light. He exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, a profound sense of relief washing over him. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Serafina's SUV pulled to the side of the road, and Elias parked a short distance behind, taking a moment to collect himself. His hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but there was no turning back. He had made the call, and they were here. As the officers exited their vehicle, Elias watched Serafina in her driver's seat. At first she was still, but then she began gesticulating wildly, shouting something at the officers. From the frantic nature of her movements, it was clear she was already agitated, her voice muffled but her tone unmistakable. She was already spinning her narrative, painting herself as the victim. Elias took a deep breath and stepped out of his car, walking slowly towards the scene. The officers were at her window, and he could see Serafina pointing emphatically in his direction, her face flushed with rage. "He hit me," she screamed, loud enough for him to hear as he approached. "He attacked me and now he's following me. Arrest him. I'm the one being harassed here." Elias's stomach churned. There it was, the exact script he had feared. She was twisting reality, casting herself in the leading role of the damsel in distress. But this time, there was hard evidence. And this time, he would not back down. One of the officers, Officer Drake, turned to look at Elias as he approached, his expression calm and unreadable. Elias could only hope they would listen to the full story. "What happened here, sir?" Officer Drake asked, his tone professional. Elias took a breath, his heart still hammering. "I was in a parking lot," he began, his voice steady. "This woman started yelling at me over a parking spot. Things escalated. She shoved me, slapped me, and then keyed my car while I was in the store. I tried to walk away, but she wouldn't stop. Then just now, she deliberately rammed my car and drove off." Serafina cut him off, her voice shrill. "Lies! He's lying. He attacked me. He's dangerous." Elias clenched his fists but kept his voice calm. "There are fresh scratches all over my car, officer. You can see the damage. And she just rear-ended me." Officer Drake glanced over at Elias's car, his eyes narrowing as he took in the crumpled bumper and the deep gouges along the side panel. "We'll take a look," he said, turning back to Serafina. "Ma'am, please step out of the vehicle." Serafina's face turned a shade of deep red, and she slammed her fists against the steering wheel. "You can't be serious. You're really going to listen to him? Look at me. I'm the one who's been attacked. I demand that you arrest him right now." "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," Officer Drake repeated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Serafina's eyes flicked to Elias, a mixture of fury and disbelief warring in her expression. "You're doing this because of him, aren't you?" she spat, glaring at Elias. "This is all his fault. You people are all the same." Elias bit the inside of his cheek, forcing himself not to react. This was her strategy. Push, provoke, make him look like the aggressor. He wasn't going to fall into her trap. Finally, Serafina shoved her door open and stepped out, still yelling at the officers. "This is ridiculous. I'm not the criminal here. He should be the one in handcuffs." The officers remained calm, guiding her to the side of the road and asking her questions. Serafina continued her tirade, pointing at Elias and shouting about how he had attacked her, how she was the real victim. As Elias stood there, he could feel the weight of it all pressing down. The words, the accusations, the sheer familiarity of the situation. But this time was different. He wasn't the only one who knew the truth. Another officer walked over to Elias, asking him to recount the events in more detail. He described everything clearly, each escalation, each insult, and the final moment she had rammed his car. "Do you have any witnesses to the initial confrontation?" the officer asked. Elias shook his head. "There were people around, but no one got involved. I don't know if anyone recorded it." The officer nodded. "We'll check the store's cameras for any footage of the parking lot. As for the damage to your car, that's clear enough." At that moment, Serafina's voice rose again. "He's making this all up. You can't believe him over me. He's a liar." Elias tensed as Officer Drake returned, his face serious but measured. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Serafina, "we have enough evidence to place you under arrest for property damage and assault. You'll need to come with us." Serafina's face turned crimson, and her entire body seemed to vibrate with rage. "Arrest me? Are you insane?" She pointed a shaky finger at Elias. "He should be in handcuffs, not me. I'm the one who was attacked." "Please turn around, ma'am," Officer Drake repeated, stepping forward. But before he could finish, Serafina let out a piercing scream and lunged at Elias. Her fists came down hard on his shoulder, catching him off guard. The impact wasn't severe, but the sheer audacity of attacking him directly in front of police officers stunned him. "You think you can ruin me?" Serafina shrieked, swinging again. Her knuckles grazed his chest, her fury palpable, her face twisted into a feral, ugly mask. The officers moved in instantly, grabbing her arms before she could strike again. But Serafina was wild, thrashing against their hold, her words spilling out in a venomous stream. "You're nothing, you hear me? Nothing. You don't belong here." Elias stepped back, his heart pounding in his ears as the officers struggled to subdue her. Serafina kicked and flailed, screaming incoherently as they wrestled her into handcuffs. "I'm the victim!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as they guided her toward the squad car. "You're all going to regret this. I'll have your jobs. You can't do this to me." Officer Drake tightened his grip on her arm, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault and property damage. We're done here." Serafina continued to scream, her voice hoarse and ragged, as they placed her in the back of the squad car. Her eyes locked on Elias one last time, filled with a chilling, pure hatred. "You haven't won," she yelled through the window, her voice muffled but still vicious. "You'll see. I'll ruin you, you hear me?" The door slammed shut, cutting off her final threat, and the police car pulled away, leaving Elias standing there breathless and shaken. Officer Drake walked back toward him, his expression softening slightly. "Are you all right, sir?" Elias nodded, still processing the whirlwind of events. His shoulder throbbed where she had hit him, but it was the sheer absurdity of it all. The way she had been so consumed by her rage that she'd attacked him in front of the very people there to arrest her, that weighed on him. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice was strained. "Thank you." "We'll get your statement on file," Officer Drake said, handing him a card. "You can follow up at the station tomorrow if you want to press formal charges." "I will," Elias replied, the weight of the confrontation still heavy on his shoulders. The officers left, and as the sound of the sirens faded into the evening, Elias stood alone beside his damaged car. He stared at the scratches and the dents, the physical scars of Serafina's fury. This was never just about a car or a slap or an insult. This was about something more. It was about standing up, about refusing to let people like Serafina believe they could get away with their hate. He hadn't started this fight, but he was damn sure going to finish it. The next morning, Elias walked into the police station, the events of the previous day still a vivid, unsettling film in his mind. The tension in his chest hadn't fully dissipated, but the quiet, orderly hum of the station offered a strange sense of calm. He was here for one purpose: to press charges against Serafina Croft. He approached the front desk, where a young officer glanced up from her computer. "Good morning, how can I help you?" she asked, her voice professional and kind. "I'm here to press charges for an incident that happened yesterday," Elias replied, feeling the gravity of the words. "There was an assault and property damage. I gave a statement, but I want to follow through with formal charges." The officer nodded, handing him a clipboard. "Fill this out, please, and we'll have someone assist you shortly." As Elias completed the paperwork, his mind replayed the confrontation. Serafina's screaming, the impact of her blows, her unrelenting hatred. It was all still raw, as if it had happened moments ago. He couldn't help but think how easily the tables could have turned if the officers hadn't seen the truth for themselves. She would have manipulated the narrative, just as she had tried to do from the start. But now things were different. The truth was out. There was no hiding behind her status, no twisting the situation to her advantage. He had remained calm while she lost control, and the law had taken notice. "Mr. Corbin?" A voice cut through his thoughts. He looked up to see Officer Drake walking toward him. "Yes, that's me," Elias said, standing. "Come with me," Officer Drake said, gesturing for him to follow. "We'll get your statement finalized and discuss how you'd like to proceed." Elias followed him to a small functional office. Officer Drake sat behind a desk and pulled up files on his computer. "So you've decided to press charges against Ms. Croft," he said, glancing at Elias. Elias nodded firmly. "Yes, I want to press charges. She needs to be held accountable for her actions." Officer Drake leaned back, nodding in agreement. "I think you're making the right decision. With the evidence we have, the damage to your car, witness statements, and her assaulting you in front of us, there's a strong case against her." Hearing the words made it feel tangible. This was no longer just a bitter argument in a parking lot. Serafina's actions had real consequences, and Elias was determined to see this through, no matter how loudly she screamed about ruining him. As Officer Drake typed up the report, Elias heard a door slam in the distance. He glanced toward the hallway, his attention quickly returning when the officer spoke again. "We'll file this, and it will be sent to the district attorney's office. They'll review the charges and decide how to proceed, but with what we have, I can't imagine they wouldn't move forward." Elias nodded, appreciative of the officer's straightforwardness. After everything, hearing there was a clear path toward justice felt like a weight being lifted. Suddenly, a voice echoed from the hallway, loud and unmistakable. Elias's blood ran cold as he recognized it instantly. "You can't do this to me!" It was Serafina, her voice as shrill and rage-filled as it had been the day before. The office door burst open, and there she stood, her face a mask of fury, escorted by another officer. Her eyes were wild as she tried to wrestle free. It's you!" she shrieked, her gaze locking onto Elias as she lunged. "You're trying to destroy my life. This is all your fault." The escorting officer quickly blocked her path, but Serafina was relentless, her eyes blazing with hatred. "I'll sue you! You think you're going to ruin me? I'll ruin you! You're nothing! Nothing!" Elias stood up, his heart pounding, but he kept his distance. The officer holding Serafina nodded to Officer Drake as they pulled her from the doorway, her screams echoing down the hall. Officer Drake sighed, shaking his head. "She's here for her arraignment. I didn't expect them to bring her through this way." Elias sat back down, trying to steady his nerves. Even in custody, even after being arrested, she was consumed by the same vile hatred, the same entitlement that had started this all. "Don't worry," Officer Drake said, noticing the tension in Elias's expression. "She's not going anywhere. Once we finalize these charges, she'll be facing a lot more than just an arraignment." Elias nodded, though his thoughts were still swirling. Her words cut deep, but he refused to be intimidated. Not now. "All right," Officer Drake continued. "We'll submit everything. You'll be notified when the case moves forward." "You did the right thing, Mr. Corbin." Elias stood, shaking the officer's hand. "Thanks. I appreciate everything you've done." "Just doing my job," Reynolds replied with a small smile. "Good luck. We'll be in touch." As Elias left the station, walking out into the cool morning air, he felt a strange mix of relief and resolve. He had taken the necessary steps, pressed the charges, held his ground. But this wasn't over. There would be a trial, another confrontation, and who knew how far Serafina would go to make good on her threats. But Elias wasn't backing down. He had come this far. Now he would see it through to the end. Weeks had passed, but the day had finally arrived. Elias sat quietly in the courtroom, his heart steady but his mind racing. The atmosphere was thick with a quiet hum of anticipation. He scanned the room. Rows of benches, the judge's imposing bench, and a handful of onlookers. At the front, the prosecution team prepared their notes, while Serafina sat at the defense table, her face pale, but her jaw set in stubborn defiance. She hadn't looked at him, but the memory of her screaming, lunging at him, was still seared into his mind. Her eyes had been wild then. Now she was stone-faced, projecting an air of indignant innocence. Elias took a deep breath, focusing on the facts. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about accountability. Serafina had assaulted him, damaged his property, and tried to manipulate the truth. Now it was all to be laid bare. The sound of a door opening brought his attention forward as the judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Everyone stood as Judge Eleanor Monroe took her seat. She had a stern demeanor and an air of no-nonsense authority that commanded the room. "Be seated," she said, and a hush fell. The trial began. The prosecution laid out the charges: assault, property damage, disorderly conduct. Elias listened as the prosecutor, a sharp young woman named Ms. Adler, detailed Serafina's actions. "Mr. Corbin was simply trying to go about his day," Ms. Adler said, addressing the jury. "He did nothing to provoke this assault." Ms. Croft, on the other hand, chose to escalate the situation, physically assaulting him not once, but twice, in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, and even in the presence of law enforcement. "We are here today because Ms. Croft must be held accountable." Serafina's lawyer, an older man with a soft voice, stood for his opening statement. "Ms. Croft deeply regrets the events that transpired," he began. "She acted out of frustration. She is not the criminal this case paints her to be. She's a mother, a member of this community, someone who was having a bad day that spiraled out of control. We ask the jury to consider the context, the pressure she was under, and to find compassion. Compassion. Elias bit the inside of his cheek. It was always the same story. When people like Serafina made mistakes, it was about finding compassion. When people like him were involved, the narrative was always about judgment. The trial moved on to witness testimonies. A few bystanders from the parking lot confirmed the escalation, and that Serafina had physically attacked him first. Then it was Serafina's turn. She approached the stand with her head held high, an expression of stubborn indignation on her face. "Ms. Croft," her lawyer began gently, "can you describe what happened?" Serafina sighed softly. "I was having a terrible day," she began, her voice pleading. "When I saw the parking spot, I thought I could finally get a break. But then Mr. Corbin just took it. I got out to confront him, and I regret what happened next." "Why do you regret it?" her lawyer asked. "I regret losing my temper," she replied, her voice trembling with manufactured remorse. "But what people don't seem to understand is that Mr. Corbin slapped me too. I wasn't the only one who escalated things. He hit me right back." There it was, the twist. Serafina trying to paint herself as a co-victim, as if his reaction was equal to her unprovoked violence. The courtroom buzzed. It was the prosecution's turn for cross-examination. Ms. Adler rose, her focus sharp. "Ms. Croft," she began, "you claim Mr. Corbin slapped you, but isn't it true that he only did so after you slapped him first?" Serafina shifted. "Yes, but he still hit me," she insisted. "And isn't it also true," Ms. Adler continued, "that the slap from Mr. Corbin was not an aggressive attack, but a reflexive action in response to your assault?" Serafina hesitated, her eyes darting to her lawyer. "Answer the question, Ms. Croft," Ms. Adler pressed. Her voice dropped. "I suppose it was a reaction." "Yes." "So you admit," Ms. Adler said, her expression firm, "that Mr. Corbin did not initiate physical violence." Before Serafina could answer, Ms. Adler turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to call a witness to clarify the nature of the slap." A moment later, Marcus Bellwether, the middle-aged man from the parking lot, took the stand. "Mr. Bellwether," Ms. Adler asked, "can you describe the physical altercation you saw?" "Well," he began, "I saw Ms. Croft approach Mr. Jennings. She was yelling. Then she pushed him. And when he didn't react much, she slapped him across the face, hard. That's when Mr. Corbin responded with a slap of his own. But it was different. It wasn't aggressive. It was more like he was just trying to stop her from hitting him again." "Would you say Mr. Corbin's slap was a reaction rather than an attempt to escalate?" Ms. Adler leaned in. "Absolutely," Marcus said without hesitation. "It was light. It seemed like a reflex, just to defend himself." "Thank you, Mr. Bellwether," Ms. Adler said, turning to the jury. "What we've heard from a neutral witness confirms that Mr. Corbin's action was not aggression, but a defensive response." Serafina's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge announced a short recess. It was almost over. Soon the jury would decide. When court reconvened, both sides gave their final statements. Ms. Adler was precise, leaving no room for doubt. Serafina's lawyer once again appealed to emotion. But Michael knew this wasn't about bad days. It was about justice. Hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent as the four-person stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Serafina Croft, guilty of assault and property damage." Serafina's face went white, her composure finally shattering as the words settled over her. She sat motionless, her hands trembling. Reality had finally caught up. Elias exhaled slowly, relief washing over him. It wasn't just about the verdict. It was about something bigger. It was about standing up for himself, about showing that no matter how many people like Serafina tried to push him down, he would not be silenced. As the court adjourned, Elias rose, his head high, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Justice had been served. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as people gathered their belongings. Elias stood still, letting the reality of the verdict sink in. Serafina had been found guilty. The weight that had been pressing on him since that moment in the parking lot began to lift. But alongside the relief, something quieter and more unsettling lingered. Justice had been served, yes, but the entire ordeal left a bitter taste. It wasn't about winning. It was about what Serafina represented. Her hatred, her entitlement, her belief that she could treat him as less than human because of his skin color. A courtroom verdict couldn't fix that, and the thought stung deeper than her slap. Stepping out of the courthouse, the cool breeze hit his face. He paused on the steps, letting the fresh air fill his lungs, but it did little to ease the knot in his chest. The verdict brought legal closure, but emotionally, he was far from peace. Why did people like Serafina even exist? He couldn't shake the anger that simmered just beneath the surface. This entire nightmare, being yelled at, slapped, mocked, and attacked, had all stemmed from her deeply ingrained racism. She saw him not as a person, but as something she could degrade. And that kind of hatred wasn't rare. It was woven into the fabric of everyday life, in interactions often too subtle to call out but just as cutting. He hated how easily people like her walked through life, spewing their venom without a second thought. The way she had tried to paint herself as a victim sickened him, a stark reminder of how prevalent this disease of racism still was. He'd grown up with these stories, experienced the subtle digs himself, but this was different. She had physically attacked him with the full confidence that she would get away with it. Elias clenched his fists at the memory, still feeling the sting not just on his face, but on his dignity. He had tried to de-escalate, and she had only pushed harder. It was people like her that made it so exhausting to simply exist as a black man. Ms. Adler, the prosecutor, approached him, pulling him from his thoughts. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her tone gentle. Elias shrugged. "Relieved, I guess, but not as victorious as I thought I would." Ms. Adler nodded. "That's understandable. Victories in cases like these can feel bittersweet. It's about more than the verdict, isn't it?" "Yeah," Elias said. "It's just, people like her, they don't go away. Serafina probably still believes she did nothing wrong. And there are so many more like her out there. It's frustrating." His voice wavered with pent-up emotion. "I know," Ms. Adler said sympathetically. "The system can only do so much. But what you did today matters. Standing up for yourself matters." "I know," Michael muttered, though it felt less like a victory and more like surviving one battle in an endless war. "I just hate that it's still happening, that people like me have to keep fighting for something as basic as respect. I'm tired of it." Ms. Adler's expression softened. "You're right to be tired. It's exhausting. But every time someone like you stands up, it makes a difference, even if it doesn't feel like it right away." Elias managed a small, tired smile. "Thanks for everything you did in there." "You're welcome," she replied. "Take care of yourself." With a polite nod, she walked away, leaving him alone on the courthouse steps. He took a deep breath and started walking toward his car, the same car that had been at the center of the storm. The damage was repaired, but the memory lingered. The scratches and dents were gone, but they were a physical manifestation of Serafina's ugliness that he would never forget. He slid into the driver's seat and sat in silence. His reflection in the rear-view mirror caught his eye. The man staring back was weary, tired of having to fight just to be treated like a human being. It wasn't just Serafina. She was a symptom of a larger problem. Racism wasn't just a rare, isolated event. It was the subtle way people hesitated to sit next to him on the train, the way a cashier watched him too closely. And then it showed up in blatant, violent ways, like a slap in a parking lot from a woman who expected to get away with it. Elias's fists clenched the steering wheel. None of it was fair, and yet this was the world he had to navigate. He started the car, pulling out of the parking lot as the city streets blurred past. The trial was over, but the real fight, the one against the ingrained racism people like Serafina carried, would never truly end. He had won today, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like he had simply survived another encounter in a long series of battles, and he knew there would be more. He pulled into his driveway, his body and mind exhausted. As he turned off the engine, he thought about what Ms. Adler had said, that standing up mattered. Maybe it did. Maybe it was the only way to push back against the tide. But in that moment, all Elias wanted was peace. To not have to fight, to not have to justify his existence, to just be. He stepped out of the car and walked to his front door, trying to focus on the small sense of relief that came with knowing Serafina was held accountable. But the bitterness lingered. and he knew it would be a long time before the anger at the world he lived in would truly fade. For now he had done what he could, and that would have to be enough.